Okay, we're live.
Yay.
It says live.
Yep, it says live. That means we're live. So hi, everyone. You can come on into the chat room. And if you would like to let us know who's here, who you are, and where you're from, and what you're working on, where you are in your, what genre you're working on, where you are in your book project, that would be awesome. And Stephen is like, he wins, the first person.
Yay.
So that's awesome. We know that people are able to see us. So we're just going to give the system a minute. Hi, Becky. For everyone to come on in and make sure that you can see us and hear us and all that to get going. Awesome. Hi, Laurel and Francis from Kansas City. Oh my gosh, we got people from Florida and Michigan and Pennsylvania and New York. Here they all come. This is awesome. Jody and Susan, this is great, you guys. We got people writing everything from thriller and mysteries to gay romance. And what else did I see come through here? All kinds of stuff. Someone from London. I was just in London. Awesome. So this is great. And someone who met you, Lisa, do you see that?
No. I took my eyes off it for 1 second.
Eleni writing historical fiction. We got someone from Belgium. Hi, Jan from Belgium. And Dark Quirk. I write Dark Quirk. I don't know what that is.
That? I like it, whatever it is.
And
I have many dark quirks.
Lindsay from South Africa. Okay, this is awesome, you guys. Wow, I wish we could map out where everyone's from. It's so fun to see. Okay, so I am confident that you guys can hear us and see us, and it looks like we've got every type of genre, inspirational fiction, everything. So with that said, Amy, do you want to take it away and introduce us?
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar on writing backstory in women's fiction and everything else, I think is probably a better title for the webinar. And you see Jenny Nash, who is the Chief Creative Officer for Author Accelerator and a book coach and an author of 8 books. And she met Lisa Cron at the UCLA, teaching for the UCLA Writers Extension Program. And Lisa is a story coach and the author of Story Genius, which seems to be taking the writing communities I'm part of by storm. And she is also the author of, let me see, Wired for Story. I'm all caught up in Story Genius. I forgot about that for a second. And we're really happy to have you here with us today. This is something I know as an author and an editor and a book coach that is a topic that comes up over and over again. And it's the reason that we wanted to address it with all of you today, because while rules are often meant to be broken, it's good to have some things in mind as to what tends to work for backstory in your stories. So welcome, and take it away, Jenny and Lisa.
Well, we should also let people know, Amy, that you're the host of this webinar on your blog, and we're grateful for you inviting us. And Amy is also a book coach at Author Accelerator and trained in the Story Genius method. So towards the end of our presentation, she's going to jump in and talk a little bit about her experience there. She's also, of course, the author of several books, and one coming out shortly in 2017, right?
Yes, in November.
Well, that's short. I mean,
it is short. Publishing, that's short.
So true.
It's crazy.
It's like tomorrow. So
it is tomorrow in publishing.
I know, right? Okay, so what's going to happen is I am going to share my screen and share the presentation that Lisa and I have, and you will not see us for a moment, and then we will take it away for that presentation. Well, in theory, I'm going to do that. All right, so if you can let me know if you can see that, Lisa.
Not yet. I just, yes, there it is.
Okay, great. So let me put that. Okay, so I think we're ready to roll. So Um,
I'm already rolling.
I know, right?
Sorry.
It's for some reason it's flipping. Okay, I think we're set.
Mhm.
All right, so there we are, our smiling faces. And the thing that I would just like to go over is how this webinar is going to go today. So part one is we're going to talk about what a story really is, which is the idea at the core of Story Genius, Lisa's book. And that's her lovely red cover, which was a very hard one cover for her. and then in the second part of the presentation, we're going to talk about what backstory is and how you develop it. And third, we're going to give you, well, I'm going to speed ahead. Third, we're going to give you a little sense about how you can get further into Story Genius. We have some seats set aside just for Amy's followers, and we'll get into that and talk about that. And then we have time set aside for you guys to ask questions in the chat box. So get your questions ready. If you have questions while Lisa is giving the presentation and we're chatting, definitely put them in the chat box. I am here with my pad of paper and my pencil, so when they go whizzing by your chats, I can grab them and we will answer them, and we will try to answer all of your questions. So that's the way it's going to go today. Oh, and one tiny housekeeping thing. If for some reason we freeze or you can't hear or something happens, please just refresh your screen or come back into the link and we should still be here. If I freeze and disappear, or Lisa or Amy does, we will also try to come back. So bear with us. It's actually raining here in Los Angeles where Lisa and I are, which is, I know it's embarrassing because the rest of the world has real weather, but when it rains here, like everything falls apart. So that might include the internet. We don't know.
It's so true.
I heard a thing on the radio the other day that there were double the number of crashes on the freeway just because of the rain. It's so embarrassing. All right, so enough about the weather. Lisa, take it away.
Okay, so let's talk for 1 minute about what a story really is, because I think that this might actually surprise you, because what we think a story is and what we think has pulled us in when we're reading is actually something very different than what has actually pulled us in. And I think in the very beginning, we're going to start to see how backstory has been really, really misrepresented in terms of the way writers are taught to think about it. In fact, if anything, as you know, as you guys probably know, backstory is often told as something you should kind of eschew and not really think about, and it's kind of got this sort of pejorative slant to it, and that could not be less true. So in order to get to that, to really see that, first we're going to talk about what a story really is. So let's go to the next slide, and that will kind of get forward. Wait, there we go. Okay. So we're going to stick on this slide for a while, because let's look at it for a second, and then I wanted to decode it in very familiar writing parlance so that we'll really dig down into it. So what a story really is a story is about how what happens affects someone who's in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal, and how that person changes internally as a result. That is what a story actually is. So let's break that down now in familiar writing parlance. So a story is about how what happens. That what happens is merely the surface of the story. That is the plot. And I cannot say this strongly enough or enough times. The plot is not what your story is about, which is why when you turn to things like story structure books, story structure being a misnomer because it's really plot structure, and focus on that first, it does nothing but lead you astray, because the what happens is merely the surface, and that is not what your story is about. So a story is about how what happens, that's the plot, affects someone. That's your protagonist, and your protagonist is your reader's avatar within the book. In fact, they've done functional MRI studies that show when you're lost in a story, the same areas of your brain is lighting up as would light up if you were doing what that main character is doing. It really is, I like to say, it's like a Vulcan mind meld. It's like, as a reader, we become the protagonist, which which begins to give meaning to the idea that what happens over there is just the surface, because what's happening in the plot is going to get all of its meaning and all of its weight, both emotional and psychological weight, based on one thing and one thing only. And that is how it is affecting your protagonist, and not just affecting them in general, like, your protagonist really does not like to go out, let's say in rainy weather, just to pull something out of what's going on at this very moment. They don't like to go out in rainy weather. So because over here in the plot, it's raining, they've decided to stay home and curl up with a good book and not go out and do the thing that they were meant to do. We don't mean how it affects them in general, but how what's happening affects your protagonist in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal. And that is that story problem, which is both a plot problem and an internal problem. And that is what your protagonist is always going to be dealing with. That plot problem is a problem. It is something that is going to force your protagonist to step by step, scene by scene, make a change, because story is about how someone changes, and all change is hard, even good change. So if you have a story where something's going on in the plot, even if it is a problem and your protagonist can deal with it easily, or it's just kind of one, fun party, they go to the next fun party and they're kind of having a great time doing what they're doing, you don't have a story. They've got to be struggling all the way through. So it's about how what happens, that's your plot, affects someone, that's your protagonist, who's in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal, that is your plot problem, and how that person, meaning your protagonist, changes internally as a result. And that, my friends, that internal change is what your story is actually about. In other words, the story is not about the protagonist. The story is about how the plot affects the protagonist. It's about an internal change, not external, but internal. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, it's going to make my protagonist change from what to what? Why does my protagonist need to change at all? Aha, that brings us actually to the topic that we're talking about today, backstory, because every protagonist enters the story with two things already fully formed. Now, this is before they get to page one, before they have any idea of that dark and stormy night that your plot is about to catapult them to. They enter with two things: something they really want, that they've wanted for a very, very long time, and a misbelief that's held them back, a reason why they can't get it. And you might think, okay, a misbelief. They've got to deal with a misbelief because your plot is then created to force them to go after that thing they've long wanted. But in order to get it, scene by scene by scene by scene, they've got to confront and deal with that misbelief. And you might be thinking, okay, misbelief. I get that. It sounds like something I've heard of before. Are you talking about a fatal flaw? I've heard that expression, fatal flaw, or a wound, right? All protagonists enter with a fatal flaw. And while it's similar, that is not what I'm talking about. I would never, and I admit we evolve in everything we do, right? I know I've kind of used the term fatal flaw before. I would never use it again because it is not a fatal flaw. Think about the word flaw. Flaw, it sounds so judgmental, doesn't it? It sounds so judgy, so finger waggy, like you have a flaw, like you could be perfect, but you're flawed. It's almost like it's a moral flaw. It's like you're doing it on purpose almost. And maybe my plot is gonna teach you the error of your ways, and now you're gonna reform by the end of the story. And that's not what we're talking about. Wound kind of goes in the opposite direction. It's like now your protagonist is a victim, and life has done them wrong, and maybe the plot's gonna help them heal. Now, I'm not saying that either of those things might not be so, but I tend to think of it more as something that I call a misbelief. And it's something that tends to happen very early in life, either in childhood or in early teen years, when your protagonist goes through some sort of a trauma. And again, we're talking about an emotional trauma, not necessarily, a big scale trauma like they get kidnapped or aliens take them onto a spaceship, but that traumatic moment where life teaches them that what they thought was true is not. It is a misbelief about how human nature works. For instance, something like you might realize at some moment, wait, whenever somebody's being nice to me, they're only trying to get me to do something, to con me. That would be a misbelief. aha, I've realized this really important thing about life. Because in that moment, it usually is true. That person is trying to con them. And that is why they're being nice. But to take that belief about human nature out into the world past that moment, it was adaptive in that moment. Now it's maladaptive, because out here in the real world, I mean, please, you guys, tell me this is true. Out here in the real world, that's not so. When people are being nice to you, they might actually like you. They're not trying to get you to do something. But you can see how a misbelief like that would steer someone wrong from that moment up until the moment where the plot kicks in and forces them to go after that thing they want. So those two things together, that they enter the story with already fully formed, the desire, what they want, and that misbelief, is what your plot then forces them to go after. But in order to go after it, and scene by scene by scene, they've got to confront these two things. And that's what we call this internal struggle between the desire and the misbelief, is what I call your novel's third rail. In other words, everything that happens in the plot forces them internally to struggle with this internal quandary. And I know I probably have to explain that a little bit. When I first was teaching this, actually, I was in a class that I was teaching at UCLA. And I had a student raise her hand, and she said, okay, I understand what you mean about the third rail, but what are the other two rails? And I thought, okay, we're not in New York. I need to explain this. The third rail is that rail, the electrified rail in a subway car that actually supplies the energy, the juice that makes the car move. So the meaning that is going to be supplied as to what's happening up there in the plot comes from the third rail, this internal struggle, this internal change that your protagonist is going to be going through from page 1 all the way through until the end, when they have what we call their aha moment toward the end, that allows them now to see things differently and hopefully to solve that plot problem that they've been dealing with all the way through. And in fact, when you hear, and I'm sure you've heard in the writing world, they talk about what's the narrative thread of your novel. It's not the plot. The narrative thread is this internal struggle, because that is what we come for. Think about it in life. We don't come for the surface. We don't come for the plot, because the plot is merely the surface of your story. That's the surface world. All of us live in the surface world. All of us have navigated the surface world pretty well from birth up until now, because we're all sitting here. You guys are out there, and you're listening to this, and I'm going to bet that you're probably sitting, or maybe you're on the exercise machine as you're listening. But whatever you're doing, if you're, let's say, sitting, I am betting that you're doing a bang-up job of it. You don't need to read a book or see a novel or a movie that's going to teach you how to sit in the surface world. We don't want to know about the surface. What we want to know is about what goes on beneath the surface. It's like in real life. How often I think of story as this difference between what we're saying out loud and what we're really thinking when we say it. Because think about in your own lives, how often is what you're saying out loud and what you're really thinking when you say it the same thing? And which one is more interesting? And which one is juicier? And which one is more revealing? It's what you're thinking, right? And think about when you're out there and you're talking to other people. We're always wondering, I hear what you're saying, but what do you really mean? We're interpreting that internal piece of it. I mean, we're always wondering what people make of us, what they're thinking, as opposed to what they're saying, how they're hearing what we're saying. Even when, we're ordering from the barista in Starbucks, we want that person to like us. That's what we come to story for. It's like in life. I bet you've heard this expression 1,000 times. Never let them see you sweat. And think about that. What does that imply? It implies that inside we're sweating buckets. Story is about sweating. It's about what we're really thinking. I once had a student at UCLA who said, I know on the surface I look really put together. And she really did. She said, I know on the surface I look put together, but inside I'm a raging mess. And I'm trying to keep all of you from seeing it. Story is about that raging mess inside. It's about being vulnerable. It's about the things that we keep hidden. It's about what we're really thinking. And as we're about to see, what we're really thinking, the meaning that we read into everything comes from one place and one place only. And that's what takes us into our next slide and the next point that we want to make, which is about backstory. What is backstory? And how do you develop backstory? So what is it?
Wait, Lisa, can I
Yes.
stop you before you go on?
Absolutely not. No, of course. Anytime.
You know I'm
Leave in.
going to anyway. So
Yes, I know.
know.
Please.
So there are a couple questions. I know we're about to define what backstory is and how you develop it, but there are a couple questions coming through that I think will be instructive to answer before we get to the next part. And the first one is Lori asks, so is what you're talking about essentially point of view?
That is a great question, Lori. And when you talk about point of view, to be very clear, we're not talking about point of view like, are you writing third person, first person, third person limited, but point of view in terms of how your protagonist, and really every character, but we're talking about the protagonist now, sees and views the world. And the answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely, that is exactly what it is. We're talking about point of view, story-specific worldview, what the meaning your character walks onto page 1, already reading into what's happening from that moment forward. So yes, great question. And absolutely, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, awesome. I have another one, which I'll stop you in a minute, but let's go to what backstory is.
Okay. The backstory is past, as it says right there. The past is the yardstick that your protagonist and every POV character, and P.S., you, all of us, we use backstory. It's our decoder ring to gauge the meaning of what's going on in the present. And I mean, I think all any of us has to do is look at the acrimony in the country right now, in the world right now, to see that every one of us is reading the same events very, very differently. Based on what? Based on what our past has told us that those things mean. The point is, the past backstory isn't just, here are the things that happened to my protagonist up until the moment the story starts. The past is what those things, those events that happened, story-specific events, again, not everything from birth to death or birth until the your story kicks in, but those story-specific events that you would be developing, you're developing them because you're looking for what they taught your protagonist, both about how the world works, and also, as we'll discuss, that's where all of the balls in play, the events that are happening in your novel, were no doubt set into play in their story-specific past. And that's what you really want to develop, and develop it as completely as you're developing your novel, and develop it honestly, really, truly, if possible, before you get to page 1. And one thing I'm always saying, and then we'll kind of leap forward and describe this even more, is that what I am talking about here now, you guys, is not pre-writing. We're not talking about the real writing starts when you get to page 1. And now you're going to do all of this, and I'm doing air quotes now. My camera's off so you can't see me, but like all this research, and now we're getting to page 1. This is real writing. You're taking it as seriously. You're writing many scenes as completely as you would if you were envisioning it being on page 1, because guess what? All of this is going to be there. It is the most fundamental layer of the story that you're writing, and much of it is going to be laced into your novel from page 1 going forward. Without digging into this, it's like you're saying, I'm going to write a 327 page novel about the most important turning point in someone's life who I know absolutely nothing about. Like, how could you do that? You're shoving your protagonist onto the page with amnesia. And amnesia is sort of, deeply terrifying. So let's move on to the next slide and talk a bit about what we actually mean here. And here's the point. Here's the secret. All stories begin en medias res, and that is Latin. I'm sure you guys have probably heard that expression before. That's Latin for in the middle of the thing. And what that means is if you look at that little blue line there, your plot kicks in, your story starts. Page 1 is right there in the middle. That's the middle. Your story starts long into the past, as far into the past as you're going to go forward in the story. So in order to get there, if you start writing on page 1 where that middle diamond is, you're starting in the middle of what? Nothing. You're just going forward without any actual story. Stories are made up of those two layers, and your narrative weaves them together. And so what we want to talk about now, before we move to the next slide, is, and this is what I want to kind of challenge you guys to do, is the fact that I am sure that you have heard from some of the most prominent, and again, I'm using air quotes, writing gurus out there, keep backstory off the page. Don't put any backstory on the page until you get to page 75. Are you kidding me? Right now, I challenge all of you. When this is over, go and start looking at the books on your shelves. You will see that backstory is often what begins a story, and we'll talk about how in a minute. Backstory is woven in from page 1 forward. It's there, and we'll talk about in what forms in a minute. It is always there. It is the most potent layer of your story. As Faulkner so brilliantly said, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. The point is when it's there, it's woven in so deftly that you don't see it as backstory. What those writing gurus really mean is, don't do it poorly. In fact, it's funny. I'll just one quick story here. I had a student at UCLA who, when I was asking him about, well, wait a minute, like what's going through your character's mind here? What are they? And he said, oh no, that would be a flashback. And my teacher told me never use a flashback. And I thought, oh, well, that reminds me of the time back when wait a minute, that's a flashback. And I said to him, well, I think that what she probably meant was just don't do it poorly. And kind of the kicker to that story is I was then guesting in an instructor's class at UCLA, and I told that story, and I hear this very throaty laugh behind me, and the instructor says, that was me. I was the one who said that. And she said, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Don't do it poorly. Because when it's done poorly, it definitely stops the story. And just very quick kind of digression, it stops the story for 2 reasons. We're going to go forward and see one of the reasons, which is that it is just done clunkily in the way that it's done, or it's woven in for the wrong reason. The other reason it tends to be done poorly, and this is something I don't think I've said anywhere, Jenny, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like just for you guys, which is the other reason it's done poorly is because the writer hasn't actually really developed it. They don't really know what it is. They can't go deeply into it. They'll come up with a sentence or two and plunk it in, but they've come up with it apropos of nothing. And so it doesn't really give us any kind of insight, and they couldn't go any deeper than this one kind of moment or snippet that they've come up with. So it doesn't even do what a really good flashback, what a really good snippet of memory actually does, which is give us insight into how the character is making sense of what's happening, and not making sense in general, but making sense because at that moment, because in every scene you write, your protagonist is going to have to make a difficult decision that is going to cost them something emotionally. And that's where they begin to struggle. And that's where they begin to use the past to try to figure out what's happening in the moment means, what it's going to cost them, and therefore what they should do. Because that's what all stories about. Again, last thing, and then I promise we can move on.
No, wait, you can't tell your story. I'm stopping you.
Okay. No!
Because this is my job, in case people think I'm rude.
I know, and I always tell Jenny, interrupt me, because I can keep going and go, and another thing.
Okay, so there's a couple of key questions that people are asking.
Okay,
so
good.
Leslie asked a question I know a lot of people probably have, which is, okay, what if I'm writing memoir? Is this still work that I should do?
Yes, the story, regardless your format, regardless your genre. Story is story. What we're wired to come for, what we look for is true, no matter what you're writing.
Okay, and I can absolutely verify that. I write memoir, I coach memoir, and you need to do this work to understand what your story is about, so that you're not just telling your life story where you begin like, I was born in a cabin in the woods, and you've already lost your reader by the time that you do that. The other important question people are asking, Karma asked this and Mason asked this early on. Okay, this misbelief, what if you're writing middle grade or YA? Isn't that, does it always have to be in a childhood, the misbelief? And if you're writing, could it happen in an adult? So they're asking about the timing of the misbelief, when it tends to take place.
It always tends to take place either in childhood or early teen years. Always. And the reason is because when we're born, there's this kind of idea that we have that there's some sort of general reality out there, and all we have to do is kind of learn what that general reality is. We kind of come in knowing it, and we all see the same world. And it could not be less true. We come in not knowing, and we come in, kids are sponges. We are trying desperately to figure out how things work. And guess what? We don't have any preconceived notions at that point. So we're soaking it in and looking, if I'm going to survive socially, and again, when I say socially, I don't mean in the dating world, but I mean socially, like just with other people, I need to learn what makes people tick, and I need to learn what's going to get me what I need, which of course when we're children is basically somebody to take care of me and love me and be there for me, because I know I can't do that out there on my own. So yeah, it really does always happen. I mean, again, I hate saying always, but 99.9% when they're children or early teen years, always. And the scary thing, and Jenny can kind of, when we teach this and when we're working with writers, really often they'll go, oh my gosh, I was looking for my protagonist misbelief and I discovered my own. Because this isn't, what I'm talking about here always is not some writing convention. What I'm talking about is how we as human beings are wired to process information. And so when we talk about a defining misbelief, that's not something that we made up because it just applies to written, stories or fiction or nonfiction or whatever. We're saying, no, wait, this is how human beings make sense of things. And since when you're writing a story, you're writing about human beings, even if it's a brave little toaster on Mars, they need to process information the same way we do. So look for your own defining misbeliefs. It can be eye-opening and a little bit scary, I have to say. But
So
yeah, it does happen then.
I have a couple other questions which I
Sure.
think will help before we move forward.
Yay.
Abby asks, why is this goal that the character wants deceptively difficult? In your description, you talk about a deceptively
Right.
difficult goal. And I think that goes to what you were just talking about, the misbelief that the character has about their own life.
Right. I mean, well, it depends on if we can talk on both levels. I mean, deceptively, let's just talk about first deceptively difficult in terms of externally, the plot layer of it. And that's because characters go in and they almost always think whatever's going to happen is going to be easy. They could solve the problem, before bed, because we always do the simplest, easiest thing when we're confronted with something difficult, thinking that's what's going to solve it. And usually the first thing we do is decide to go to bed because in the morning it'll all be gone. So yeah, it continues to get difficult as it goes forward, because usually everything the protagonist does to make it better tends to only make it worse. So that's why it's deceptively difficult. They don't realize how hard it's going to be right there in the beginning. And the same thing is true of that misbelief. With a misbelief, they really think, they don't see it as a misbelief at all. They see it as one of the most valuable life's lessons they've ever had. It taught them really how to navigate this world in a successful way. And they think it's going to help them get what they want. In fact, they don't tend to see that. In fact, almost always it's what's been keeping them from getting what they want. So it looks like always it's going to be a cakewalk. And that's why as it goes forward, it seems to get harder and harder and harder and harder. And I hope that answered the question.
Yes, I think it does. So there's a lot of questions about starting to get into the how to, how do you do this if your story is not being told chronologically? Does backstory work in this context? And the answer is absolutely, of course. So the timeline that you're looking at right now is something that you have to work out for not just your protagonist, actually, but every character.
Yep.
Before you start writing. And once you have this timeline set, you can present it in any way you want. It can be presented in the novel in any structure or format, but you've got to have it in a holistic way before you start in
right,
this sense.
Because once your character steps onto the page, this is the lens through which they're going to be seeing things from that moment forward. Whether you're going backwards or forwards or whatever, you need to know what it is. You have to know what it is. The same way, it's kind of like, what's that? We were talking about, is it a Visa or a MasterCard commercial? Don't leave home without it. it's like your past experience, that decoder ring, is the one thing that your character never leaves home without. So yeah, it's not to say that therefore you're telling your novel in a chronological linear way, you know, like real time, but it's to say you have to know what this is before you can send your character onto page 1.
Right. So before we get to the examples of how to use this information in story, could you please just quickly restate the definition of misbelief for everyone? And so some people are asking questions, what exactly is a misbelief, and what are the two things that power the story? So if you could just restate those quickly, then we'll go on. Okay.
100%. A misbelief is something that happens early in your protagonist's life that changes how they see the world. It changes how they read other people. For instance, something like, as I said earlier, the nicer someone is to you, the more they seem to want to get to know you, the more they're only trying to manipulate you to do what they want you to do. That would be a misbelief. A misbelief is always something about human nature, about how we interact with each other. A misbelief is never a factual misbelief like, I believed that the world was flat, and guess what? It turns out to be round. Or like, wasn't this like, I think about like Jack Nicholson, like I believed the person who I believed was my mother turned out to be my grandmother, and the person who I believed was my aunt turned out to be my mother. It's not a factual misbelief. It's a misbelief about how the world works. And that misbelief then guides your protagonist's life kind of from the moment that it takes shape. And as you're seeing in that slide up there, that's your origin scene, would be the moment within which, the scene within which that misbelief is born. Think of a misbelief when it's born as like a small aha moment. Aha, this is how people treat each other. And then for the protagonist, because in that moment, it was very adaptive. In that moment, they were 100% right about what was going on. And it saved them probably from some sort of trauma. Like if the character, an example I've been using is, if let's say your character is someone that when she was a child, she grew up in a very, very dysfunctional family. Her sister was basically feral, and she felt like completely not seen. And so she's decided that the way she's going to bond with other people, because that's what she wants, is at school, all the kids have decided one day they're going to bring in this little anime doll that they've all bought, and she's been saving up her money to buy it. And the day before they're going to bring it to school, her money goes missing, and she's bereft. And her sister comes and says, oh my gosh, I know you didn't tell me, but I see how much this means to you. And it kills me that your money's gone missing. Like, I wonder where it went, right? It kills me that that's gone missing. So because of that, and because it pains me so much to see you in pain, I took all my money and I bought you an even bigger one. And now the protagonist is thinking, oh my gosh, this is so great. This is so wonderful. She really does see me. She really does value me. I mattered to her. I didn't even have to ask, and she's there for me. But then her sister says, but I spent all my money on it. I'm supposed to go out with Todd tonight, and I'm supposed to pay. And Mom's still mad at me because I took the car and crashed it last week. And, she's got that $100 bill in her purse, and I know it's for food, but I'm not really that hungry. You're so sweet. Do you think you could go distract her? And at that moment, our protagonist goes, wait a minute. You don't care about me. It has nothing to do with me. You did that because you want to get me in trouble. You want to use me to do something to benefit yourself. Now, in that moment, that was probably true. And at that moment, probably other things that had happened in their life, they go, aha, I really get it now. And so believing that probably really helped our protagonist navigate, the rocky shores of that particular family. It did help them. But taking that belief out into the world, the more someone likes you, the more they want to know you, the more they seem like they're there for you, the more they actually have nefarious purposes, that's not going to help. And so that would be the birth of a misbelief. That's what a misbelief is. It's then guided your protagonist, who again, doesn't see it as anything that's bad at all. They see it as something really good and positive that they've learned. And your story is there to disabuse them of that. Now, they go in with that, and they go in with what they've always wanted. Now, in that case, often they go hand in glove. What that character really wanted was some sort of actual human connection, feeling seen, feeling valued. But they also feel like the closer someone gets to you, the more they're trying to abuse you. As you can see, the misbelief is going to really keep them from getting what they really want until the plot kicks in and forces them to go after that thing they want. But in order to do it, they're going to have to really take a good hard look, scene by scene by scene, at that misbelief and realize it's what's been holding them back. So I don't know if that kind of helped, but that's what we're talking about. And those two things together are that third rail.
Okay, so we're kind of behind. So what we're going to do is so many questions, and I'm going to hold them. We're going to go through some examples pretty quickly. And then, so I know some people probably only have an hour right now. Lisa and I can stay on and answer all the questions. So if you've got a question that is in the chat box, we're going to try really hard to answer them all at the end. But we're going to, at the moment, move on to show you sort of how this works. Well, not sort of, actually how this works. So I'm trying in 2017 to not say things, equivocate, like sort of, or well, there are other things, but that's one of them. All right, so there's three kinds of flashbacks, basically. There's a snippet of memory, a slightly longer memory, which might be a whole paragraph, and then a whole scene flashback. And we don't, in this context, have time to do a whole scene flashback, but you'll get a good sense of how that works and what it means. The key point to remember is when you're bringing backstory into your story, which is, flashback is just another way of saying, now I'm going to use backstory. Whenever you're doing it, however you're doing it, it's never merely an anecdote. And I know you want to say something about that, Lisa.
Yeah, it's never merely, this is some interesting thing that happened that has nothing to do with the story that you're telling. It always has story relevance. And often one of the places that writers can be pulled aside, especially if you're writing memoir, is, oh, well, this is some interesting thing that happened. It really has nothing to do with my story, but it's interesting in and of itself, so I'm going to plunk it in here. The reader believes that everything in the story is there on a need-to-know basis. If they didn't need to know it, you're not going to tell us. So when you suddenly break from the real story and you're giving us something that doesn't really have to do with it, we're going to try to figure out what it does have to do with it, because we just assume tacitly that it does. So we're going to make up a reason. And we're going to inherently be wrong because there is no right reason. And at that moment, you have really broken that narrative thread, that thing that's held us into the story, and now our imagination wanders, and now we put the book down and we don't pick it up again. So the biggest takeaway here is that, and this is what we're going to talk about as we see how to weave these three kinds of flashback in, you always weave backstory in service of what's happening in the moment on the page. The other mistake that writers will make is they'll plunk in backstory because, well, at some point my reader's going to need to know this, so I might as well put it in here now. Don't do that. So it's because it always serves, as you're seeing there, it always serves what's happening in the moment. The first kind is that snippet of memory. And again, go and start reading books. You'll see, especially even in the third person, you'll see that there's always these little, they don't even feel like asides. They're done so deftly, you don't even notice it. But go back and start to see where little itty bitty bits of memory are in everything that you read. And it's in that moment where your protagonist, again, is reading meaning into what's happening in the moment. The next kind of backstory is a longer snippet of memory. And this is where your protagonist is really probably actively trying to figure out what something means and always what to do about it. To be very clear, they're never thinking about the past in some sort of, I'm going to muse about the past, or I'm strolling down memory lane. Isn't this wonderful and lovely? It's never like that. It's always in every scene. They're being, forced to make some sort of tough decision. Even if it's deciding between two good things, it's still hard. And we use the past to make sense of the present. So it might be a paragraph or two where they're thinking, and again, I'm saying this in a very general way now, but it's like, oh my gosh, I should be doing this. Well, in the past, when I did this, blah, blah, blah happened. But if I do that, then this might happen now. Yeah, but then in the past, if I didn't, so they might be seesawing back and forth from past to present, maybe even into the future, and then past to present. Done right, and here's the secret: done right, even when they're doing you're doing an entire flashback, as we'll talk about next, you never feel when you're reading like you've left the story present. because we are in the character's head as they're making sense of it. We know that the reason they're thinking about this thing in the past is purely so they can figure out what to do now because the plot is forcing them to do it. So that's what gives your story that 360-degree sense of, oh my gosh, when I'm lost in a story, I'm actually literally lost in the reality of the protagonist. So that is how that works.
And one way to think of this, one clarification,
Yeah.
what you're describing is
Please.
if the information is coming from you, the author, like me, the author, I need my reader to know this information, or gee, I got to get this in before chapter 3, or oh wait, I haven't told them that yet, I better tell them, or wait, they need to know this, I better tell them. That is always a red flag. You want to have whenever you leap back into a character's past, even if you're leaping back to yesterday or leaping all the way back to their childhood when this misbelief took root, it wants to be triggered by story present, by what's happening in the moment.
Exactly.
It doesn't come from you, it comes from the story. And I think we will show that. We'll talk quickly about the longer scene, which is exactly the same thing, that if you leave the current action and go back into a whole long scene from the past, but in that case, the scene will have its own arc, its own sense of time. It'll be in one different location, we'll have dialogue, the whole thing. And the key in all these 3 forms of flashback and of using backstory is to let the reader know where you are in time and where we are, and to ground the reader in that. So
right.
Oh, go ahead.
Exactly. No, perfect. Because the next slide actually said it. Exactly. Ground them in time so we know where they are. But no matter what the format is, meaning a snippet, a longer snippet, and a full-fledged flashback, the reason that you go into it is because in the moment, the protagonist is trying to make sense of what's happening so that she can make a decision and take some sort of action. That is the key thing. When they go into it, and let's talk for 1 second, we'll just use as an example that entire scene flashback, they are in the moment trying to figure something out, that the decision they're being forced to make. And that's what, think about in your own lives, that's what triggers them to go, okay, wait a minute. And now they're probing that thing that happened in the past to look for some type of useful inside intel to better navigate what's happening in the moment. So you're always aware that they're not just thinking about the past for the sake of thinking about the past, but they're thinking about it, looking for inside intel to help them navigate what's happening in the moment. Sometimes then when they come out of the flashback, they now see something differently. Often, it's very often, almost always, it's given them some sort of insight about what they should do now. And often what happens is it has them now, the flashback itself, they might think about that differently. In other words, and think about it in your own lives. How often when something happens, do you read one meaning into it? And now in the future, when other things have happened, you look back and you realize, oh, wait a minute, something very different was going on there and I feel really differently about it. So often when they come out of the flashback, they're looking at that event differently as well. But the point is, it's always not just anchored by, but what makes a flashback active in your story is that it is being used by your protagonist, not by you to tell us, but by your protagonist or point of view character to make sense of and to make a decision of something that's happening in the story present. That is the key and the secret to flashback.
Okay, so let's go through a couple examples. Of this is what you do not want to do. And this is what Lisa and I both see a lot in our work with writers. We just see this mistake a lot. So an info dump. Do you want to go through this? This is, I guess we should explain, in Lisa's book, Story Genius, which is, if you haven't checked out, you absolutely should. It's a wonderful book. I guess it's fair for me to say that. I'm a little biased. I coached Lisa through the writing of that book as her book coach. And in the pages of Story Genius, I developed my next novel according to Lisa's methods. So the story that you follow in Story Genius is the one that I'm making up as we go along. And that's also the story that we follow in our Story Genius workshop. So that's why my examples are here. And Lisa asked me to do some poor examples to show you what not to do. So this is one of them.
Yes, exactly. And I just want to, can I answer one? My eye went to the chat box for 1 second. Karen, I want to answer that question. Backstory does apply because she said, it says women's fiction. It applies to everything. You're absolutely right. The title was, but backstory, this applies to nonfiction and to any gender. It has nothing to do with, you can't see me doing air quotes, with women's fiction. Women's fiction is, we don't even need to go there. Backstory and what we're talking about is true of absolutely positively any story that you're writing and any genre. So to leap in right here, and just to say, Sharon is a TV producer, and she's talking to Ruby, who's the protagonist of the novel, who is supposed to write something on deadline, and her life is falling apart, and Sharon's worried that she's not going to be able to. So an info dump is where now Sharon is saying something to this character Ruby, and here is Jenny stepping in and saying what Ruby might be narrating to the reader, because this would be a writer thinking, oh my God, we got to know who Sharon is. So now Jenny would have Ruby as if she'd step in and go, okay, time out on my story. I'm doing that big timeout thing like they do in sports. Only thing I understand about sports is that timeout thing. Timeout, and now she's going to tell us. She's stepping in front of the story. By the way, she was a producer of my show. Short, she had blonde hair and blue eyes. Like, who cares? What does that have to do with anything? And she'd been first in her class at USC. Who cares? Her senior project film, blah, 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 was blah, blah. Now watch, if I were you guys, even as you're reading that paragraph, your mind starts to blur, because what you're thinking is, why do I need to know this? What's the point? Where are we going? And because there clearly is no point, you literally stop reading. So this is an example of that kind of info dump where we're just being given information because, we do kind of need to know some stuff about Sharon, but we have no idea why we're even getting this now. It's like, here, let me give you a thumbnail sketch of this character. This is something you never, ever, ever want to do. The way that Jenny actually wrote the scene takes us to the next card, unless you want to say something about that there, Jenny. And this is how the information really gets woven in. And it's Sharon saying, I'm worried about you. Now we're in Ruby's head, and she's making sense of what's going on. And she's really dealing with this difficult situation because, again, she wants to make this deadline. And again, if you read the book, you'll see all the reasons why it's going to be difficult for her to do it. But she's running what's going on here with Sharon through her past memory. So she says, she sounded exactly like my sister Nora. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Have you considered my offer to come to Ojai? So this is giving us a bit of backstory about what's happened with, we now know she's got a sister. We now know that her sister is saying these things to her, and it's letting us know, wait, something big is going on here for sister saying this to her. Now I wonder what it is. What even triggered it? What triggered this whole thing? The sound in Sharon's voice. That's what's triggered it. But now she's, again, trying to figure out what to do. They both sounded as if they were talking to a sick child or a wounded animal. And what good did that do? Because, again, she's trying to figure out what they're doing, what she's doing. These were not soft women. She's not stepping forward and doing it. She's trying to figure it out. Nora raised horses and dogs and children and ruled them all with her no-nonsense logic. Sharon ran a rogue TV empire so successful it made longtime studio executives weep. Now, why is that not an info dump? Because she's using it to make sense of how they're treating her now, which goes to that next. She's pulling all of that through this lens that then says, toughness was an attribute we all shared, and I was disappointed they would revert so quickly to pity. So she's analyzing what they're doing, how they're treating her, so she can figure out what to do next. Look at all the layers of insight we've gotten as Ruby is making sense of what's happening right there in the moment. She gave us not just information about Sharon, she gave us information about Nora, she gave us information about how they all see each other. They're all tough, so now we know something about her. She's giving us information about that they're all reverting quickly to pity. And also on one level, she's doing what often happens in a story, which is that we, the reader, often have more insight into what's going on than the protagonist does. Because when she says, I was disappointed that they would revert to pity so quickly, or so quickly to pity, what we know is that, wait a minute, maybe Ruby doesn't deserve this. Maybe something bigger is going on in terms of how Ruby is acting and in terms of her behavior than Ruby herself actually sees. So she's given us insight into that. All of those layers is in that one snippet woven in. And more than that, last thing I'll say here, Jenny, I promise, is that notice that when she did that, we never felt like we left the story. We never felt like now I'm somewhere else and now I'm coming back to Ruby. Every bit of that was rooted in the story present in a way that in the prior scene, when we got that thing about, let me give you a little Wikipedia sketch of who Sharon is, we had left the story entirely. This is how you make backstory relevant to story. And it's not like you're making it relevant. It's almost like, it's not like you're making backstory relevant to your story. It's you're making your story relevant by giving us the backstory enough to understand what's happening in the moment. Meaning not just externally, but also internally, and how your character is making sense of what's happening to them.
So Lisa, some people are asking a question, which I think is a really good one. They're saying, well, wait, this seems like the character is overreacting. By which I think they mean it seems like a little much, or a little, I think that's what they mean. But do you want to address that?
She's not overreacting at all. I mean, I think my guess would be that comes from the notion that I know is out there in the writing world, which is don't tell us what a character's thinking. Don't tell us. Just let, that the totally misunderstood myth of show, don't tell. Just show us what's happening and we, the reader, will get it. Don't ever do that, because the reader will not get it, because we don't come for what they're getting in general. Okay, I get that she's sad. What we come for is, why is she sad? What's going on? How is she making sense of it? And is this really touching Ruby hard? Absolutely. Is she overreacting in the sense that things are happening and she's actually sort of having a mental breakdown? Yeah, that is exactly what's going on. That's what this gets onto the page. So my sense always is, and when I'm teaching writing, when I'm out there, I take that back. When I'm teaching story, because I don't teach writing, I teach story. Almost always, one of the biggest parts of it is undoing the myths that are out there. And one of the big ones is, don't put this sort of stuff on the page. And my advice to you is, start reading, look at the novels you read for this sort of thing, and you'll see it all over. The reason we don't notice it is because it's so deftly woven in that we feel like we are inside the protagonist's head. And so we don't see it as an overreaction or as internal thought. We see it as, oh my gosh, I'm seeing the world now through their eyes. This is what allows you to see the world through your protagonist's eyes, which is what we come for.
Okay, so excuse me, the next example is another thing that Lisa and I see writers do incorrectly all the time, which is just give a surface level physical description. So do you want to go through this one?
Yeah, absolutely. And this again, that story present is the first paragraph of the novel that Jenny was working on. Write or Die, and what she's discovered is that, or what's happening, what she's talked about here that happened again in backstory, because it's before the novel began, is that Ruby's the love of her life has just been in a horrible bike accident. So when she's thinking about, oh my God, watch the whale, one last, if I didn't write one last scene, now she's going into a kind of a flashback, but all she's doing is describing the surface level of it. And it kind of, whoever asked that last question, this would be that surface thing where we're not going into any of that, and see how flat it sounds. Will he be okay? I asked the nurse, wringing my hands. Again, there's a physical description as if that's showing, don't tell. Showing, don't tell doesn't mean give us the physical description. Wringing my hands, I mean, do you think he'll be okay? She gazed at me with sad eyes. We don't know, she said. We never know. I mean, again, that is so surface. That would be true of anyone in any hospital room ever. I nodded, tears pooling. That's my favorite part. Tears pooling in my eyes. This felt like divine intervention of the worst kind. It seemed too cruel to be true, which brings us back into the story you'll see. But that physical description where we didn't go into what anyone was thinking or feeling, we got the, and I'm doing air quotes, emotion through body language. Did it tell us anything? Of course not. Because of course Ruby's upset. I mean, what person, show me the person who isn't going to be upset when the love of their life might be laying there dying. And I'll show you somebody who who doesn't really love that person. We all would feel that way. And if it's a general generic of a way we'd all feel, you're not telling us a story. You're locking us on the surface and we're going to go, yes, so what? That's what you never want to do. What you want to do instead is what's on the next slide.
Really?
I think so. If we get there. And here's and the next slide. And here's that next slide. You know, same thing. I wouldn't write that one last script. He was there because of me. And now she's going into, and look at how much backstory she gives us here. Again, this is the second paragraph of the book. Because we fought and he got on his bike and I let him go up into the hills where some kid with twice the blood alcohol limit, going twice the speed limit, looked the other way or didn't look at all, or looked and decided to plow right into the man with whom I've spent the last 7 years making a life, word by word by word. Was there any place there where she talked about how she felt? Was there any big box emotion mentioned? Was there any body language mentioned? No. This is simply how this character is making sense of what happened. Looking at the backstory, looking at this very recent backstory, obviously, what had just happened, and making sense of, oh my gosh, he's there because of me. This guy's dying because of her. We know how that feels. She didn't have to tell us. And she didn't leave us to make it up for ourselves, which is what happens when you keep this onto the page. And that is not the reader's job. Because not only can't the reader do it, because they could come up with a bazillion different specifics, but how do they even know if the specific that they came up with was right? Obviously, there's no way. And so now they're making up the story. So no, this is where your story lives and breathes. That's backstory. Now we come in and the same thing. So what the hell is this? Henry, no divine intervention, Henry always said. When something in the script seemed to come without being earned, story present. So what the hell was this? And then she's going into the backstory. In the midst of a 7-episode run, she's telling us what happened. When finally we decided to do the twist on Romeo and Juliet, it looked like divine intervention of the worst kind, and it seemed too cruel to me. Again, that would be an example of one of those tiny snippets going through as she's thinking about, oh my God, how did I get into this situation? And I've got to deal with it, because what she's having to do is now rewrite this final, the ending of this final episode in 72 hours. And can she or can't she? Write or die. Perfect, again, perfect way to enter the story too, write or die. Boy, doesn't that pull you in. Anyway, so that is a great example. And if you look in the way that you see this, you'll probably find that on every page of the novels that you look at. Take a look and you'll start to see it. Again, look at how specific that backstory is. Look at how much, and think about how much Jenny had to develop to just get those lines. Of course, there's way more than those lines in it. But again, the past is what gives us that lens and meaning to what's happening in the moment.
So, I just totally lost the thread I was going to ask. It's going to be so good.
Yeah. Well, let me just answer. I see Linda's thing, and Linda, we didn't realize it was a 2-hour seminar either.
I know, right?
I have a habit of going on and on and on. But yes, there's going to be a link. You will get a link. And so you can, and anybody who put a question, if you've got to go, we'll hopefully be able to answer it. And then you'll have the answer on the link if you go forward.
Well, that actually is a very nice segue to the next thing, which is we did want to talk about the workshop that we're running. And we do only have 10 seats available that we reserved for Amy's followers and viewers, which is you guys. And this class is actually full. So those 10 seats are the only seats left. And the reason why that it's important for us to say that in relation to what you just said is that Lisa and I actually just re-recorded the videos for this workshop, and there are more than, what did we decide? There's more than 600 minutes of video. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We do really dig into it very deep, and there are also Q&As where we dig into it, and the Facebook group where we dig into it. So you get us a lot in this workshop, talking about story a lot. Stephen, I know it is an expensive workshop, to be sure. It's a 10-week super intensive workshop where you get weekly one-on-one feedback from your work with a trained book coach. There is a self-study version that is available if that price is too steep. So this is, I'm just throwing up the link here, and we're going to get back to everybody's questions. To go on to Amy's blog, and you can grab those special seats that we have set aside for you. Obviously, you get both me and Lisa in this class. And Amy, can you come back on and give a little sense of what it's like to be a coach in the program and how it works from your point of view?
Yes, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay,
Loud and
great.
clear.
I think that probably the best thing for me to talk about is two Story Genius writers that I worked with that were really very different. First, I had a brand new writer. She had never written anything before. And because Story Genius is very specific and very guided, she was really able to develop the misbelief, come to understand it, and construct the whole backstory of her characters, which was something she had never considered before. She was able to learn to understand what that third route was and to really firmly establish it before she started writing. And by the time she did start writing and get into other things that we're not talking about now with scenes and your first scenes for your book, she was really had this full understanding of kind of the history of her characters going into this. And kind of after the 10 weeks didn't seem to me anymore like a brand new writer, even though she had not written that much. Then on the other hand, I had a very seasoned writer who had a traditionally published novel. And that comes with its own kind of set of complications because she's done this before. The reason I believe she was able to be successful with Story Genius was because she was willing to put her story aside kind of long enough to actually rediscover it. And that's not an easy thing to do. I know because I had to do it with the story that I'm writing now. So because she was willing to put the story aside, and that didn't happen right away, she was able to kind of dig down into things she didn't know existed in the story. And while Story Genius is very specific and very guided, kind of we're not like the Story Genius Gestapo. Like it's also very flexible, and can kind of bend and move for the way someone needs it. And these two writers were, for me, were just a prime example of that. It can, if you're open to it, it is an amazing tool.
Well, and we should just take a minute. Lisa and I designed this workshop very intentionally, obviously, according to her program, but also she and I both have a long history of teaching a lot of workshops, and it's very frustrating to teach a writing workshop and not be able to give feedback to the students or the amount of feedback that you would like. It's also very frustrating to be in workshops where students are required to read other student work because they lose focus on their own work. And we design this very intentionally that you're focused on only your story and you have a book coach dedicated to giving you feedback only on your story so that you're not vying for the instructor's attention. So Lisa and I don't give specific feedback on your story, the coaches do, but you get way more than you would get in a normal workshop. And that, Lisa, we both love, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The feedback that you get, I mean, that's what makes this, I think, so incredibly valuable, is that you get feedback from coaches who, I mean, first of all, we have coaches who write in every genre, so that whatever your genre is, you'll have a coach who, chances are, who writes in your exact genre, so they know it. I love seeing it going back, because there's some genres I don't read as much, like sci-fi, for instance, and I'll look at, because sometimes we'll kind of oversee some of the coaches so that we can kind of just get an idea of what's out there, and they're going back and forth about these books that they've read that I have kind of no idea what they are, but they've got that bond. And the great thing about these coaches are they zero in on exactly the questions to ask, and they give you enough explanation so you really understand what I think the writer's most valuable tool, and I think our most valuable tool in life, is asking the question, why? So nobody makes a suggestion as to what you might do without telling you why. And on top of that, and this is what also amazes me, they're really kind. And I don't mean kind like pulling punches kind. I mean like, because they're almost all writers too, they really understand, and there's a simpatico and a camaraderie and an understanding of how hard the process is when you're writing, that really, I think, forms bonds that go kind of, beyond this. So, and I guess last thing is, I've found that when I, because again, Jenny and I and all of us, tend to on one-on-one kind of will oversee just to kind of see what's going on out there. What I've seen is that these coaches give notes that go above and beyond by, sometimes exponentially what I've seen students get in other writing programs that I've been involved in, you'll never get. This is just one very quick anecdote. At a very prestigious place where I taught, there was, the instructors were getting together, talking about what they did. And there's one woman who said, oh yeah, well, when I do it, I give notes while I'm watching TV. That's what I do. You will never get a coach from us who's watching television and just kind of giving you notes on the offside or during. Does anyone have commercials anymore? I don't know. We're there for you 100%, and they're just so good. So I can't, that's why I think it's like so worth it, because it is like you've got your own, private coach. How often do you get that and not pay $1 bazillion for it?
Oh, not very often. So no. I have a couple of questions that I would like to answer. People are asking if we're going to run this course again, and the answer is yes, we will. But something that I should probably mention is that this course has become so popular, and there are very limited number of seats that we can offer in each class, because it's human. It's coaches giving one-on-one feedback. It's not just something that we can plug in and crank out. It's very labor intensive. And so these 10 seats that are available to Amy's viewers right now are the only ones left in this workshop. And after this workshop, it is very likely that you're going to have to pay a lot more to get Lisa on the course the way she's on the course this time. Just because her book is so popular, her workshops are so popular. So we don't know exactly how that's going to play out. We will definitely be offering the class again in 2017. The level or the format may in fact change. We're not sure. If you have specific questions about the course, you can write to, I'll put it in the chat box. Jade at authoraccelerator.com will answer your questions if the course is right for you. There's also a really good question, and I've lost track of who wrote it, the person who's traveling. I can't find it, but somebody asked about how long does this course take in terms of the amount of time you spend. And I just want to, I guess not reiterate because I haven't said it, I want to state, this is an intensive course. This is not a little, you put in a little time and you move on kind of course, or you just watch a few videos and that's it kind of course. It's intensive, and we ask a lot of you, and we ask you to dig in, and there are assignments each week and you have a deadline each week, which is part of the training to become a good writer. And it does take people a chunk of time. I would say the average people spend is 3 to 5 hours a week on the assignments and processing the feedback. That being said, some people have spent way more time than that, and some people don't have that much time, and they do the best they can. And obviously, that's what we can ask of anyone, is that you do the best you can. We're teaching you a method here, and it's not like you're gonna fall behind or miss out if you can't do an assignment or you can't complete it at the level that you want. You will learn a lot no matter what. 10 weeks is obviously a long time out of anybody's life, and if you have, in that period of time, you're going to go on a long weekend vacation, or, you have a kid who's likely to get sick. Like if you have a kid in kindergarten, don't they always get sick? I mean, 10 weeks, you could count on your kid getting sick. It tends to work. If you're committed to doing it, it tends to work for most people. And I also want to mention, people are asking about this word apply. What's the apply thing? the Story Genius workshop is not appropriate for everyone. Sometimes we get writers who just are not in the right place in their career or mindset to have this be effective for them. So we ask you to send in a Q&A about your book and where you are in your writing life, so we can just make sure this is right for you. I mean, I know it sounds crazy that we would turn people away. It's not about how good you are. It has nothing to do with that. Or what kind of a, we're not evaluating your writing. We're evaluating where you are in the process of, and if we think you can take good advantage of this. And we will tell you if we don't think you can. We don't want to take this much money from you and have you not love it. So that's what the apply piece is about. It's not apply like, you're going to get judged for your writing. And if you don't have any writing, if you're brand new to story, well, that's our favorite thing. So don't worry about that. Okay, so I'm trying to answer all the questions about the course, and then we're going to turn and answer the story questions. Is the course online, gathering once a week? No, the course is delivered. You get the lessons once a week. I believe, I'm going to probably say this wrong. Is it Tuesday? Do you get the lessons on Tuesday or Thursday or Wednesday? You get the lessons. One of those days you get the lessons, and you get the video, you get a transcript, you get an audio, so you can consume the lessons in whichever medium works best for you. You can watch us, you can listen to us, or you can read us. And then you have the deadline for the assignment. You do it all on your own time. There is no gathering point for the lessons that you receive. The gathering point occurs, there's a Facebook group where all Story Genius alumni are in there. A lot of our coaches are in there. Lisa and I are in there, where there's a lot of support. There's a lot of Q&A. There's a lot of camaraderie. That's available all the time. And we do not answer questions on a schedule in there. Sometimes we don't answer questions at all. It sort of just depends on what's happening in the group, what's happening with me and Lisa. But we are in there as much as we can be. And then there are Q&As in this session of the workshop. There are Q&As, and those are scheduled. They're typically scheduled for Thursday or Friday, and they work quite like this workshop, where you log in and you answer questions. We usually have questions coming to us in advance, so we're a little bit more coherent in our answers. But you get a recording if you can't be present. So that is exactly how it works. Okay, so I love that we have all our Story Genius alumni and coaches on this group correcting us. Kamala, who's one of our senior coaches who oversees coaches and writers and is a rock star, reminds me that the lessons come out on Tuesday. And is there a payment plan? Oh, I'm so embarrassed that I don't know this. We recently changed platforms, and I think there is not. I think there is not anymore. Sharon, we're glad you enjoyed the webinar. Thank you. We're having questions about French, and there's two French people who are speaking to each other, which is adorable. Unfortunately, we don't have any French-speaking people on the team. We have had some people in the course whose first language is not English. We had two people in the last webinar. In fact, one of them was a Dutch writer who, a very prominent Dutch writer who was working in a new genre and came into Story Genius to learn to develop a story in that genre. It was really fun to have him. And he wrote in English though, so it worked out okay. It's not his first language, but it worked out just fine. He got the story level help he needed. So that is the answer about whether it's French or Spanish or Dutch or whatnot. We will be sending out the recording of this, so you'll have a chance to watch it again. And I'm on the payment options. I believe that PayPal is an option. Maybe somebody on the chat can set me straight on that. Lisa, I know we have a lot of story questions. Are there any course questions you're seeing that I didn't answer? Yikes. I don't think so. Oh, the early bird price, Joyce, is up here on the screen. And what else? Oh, the self-directed course, you can see the prices up there. And the self-directed course is kind of great. You get all of the videos that Lisa and I have recorded, and you get all of the assignments. You get the videos, the audio, and the transcript. You get all of the assignments just like somebody in the regular course. What you don't get is that weekly feedback and accountability. So you can run through the class as fast as you want with the information. You can do the assignments on your own, and we do have an option then to receive feedback all at once at the end if you would like to do so. That information is all up on our website. I'm going to answer one more course question, and then we're going to turn back to the story questions that you guys had, and try to answer them all. And I hope I answered the questions about self-study.
Just one thing about the self-study that you didn't say is the other thing you don't get is you don't get the Facebook group, right? I think. Oh,
that's correct. Thank you. Yes,
just to throw that out there.
Or the Q&As when we have the Q&As. Okay, the last thing I'm going to say about the course is people are asking about the continuing with your coach after the course is finished. And Author Accelerator is a book coaching business. That's what we do. That's what we offer. We offer weekly feedback and accountability in a variety of formats, whether you're writing your novel, whether you're getting ready to pitch. We have a pitch track. We even offer manuscript critique and review. We have a lot of services from our book coaches. And after Story Genius is over, you're absolutely invited to continue on with us. We have 3 different levels of coaching, which is 3 different prices and 3 different levels of feedback that you get and access that you get to your coach. And you can continue on with your Story Genius coach if you would like. If you would like to switch coaches and get another perspective on your story, you could do that. You can take a break after the 10 weeks and then come back in and keep coaching. People tend to find that they really love the weekly accountability and feedback and make good progress. So we that's why this is all set up the way that it's set up. Okay, so I love Amy and Kelly, some of our coaches. See, the thing about this is people tend to just fall in love with their coaches, and that's kind of what Lisa was saying. Is you get so much interaction with your coach, whereas in a regular workshop you barely get enough time with the instructor. And so we love the way this is set up for that. Okay, so Joyce, unfortunately, I can't hold a spot for you. It's just the link that's up there, which you can use, and we have the 10 seats for Amy's people. All right, so I am going to now move to the slide. Oh, look at me. That slide. Okay, so now we've got a few minutes that we can try to answer some of these questions, and I have a few I wrote down from early on, Lisa, and we'll try to get through these really fast because we've kept people on a long time. A lot of people are asking about a series. How does the misbelief work in a series, and that backstory about what happened to the protagonist work in a series? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, very quickly. Obviously, the backstory in terms of who they are, how they see things, and what they want works exactly the same way that it would in any novel. In other words, when if let's say it's a detective series, that character would step onto the page with all of this from the get-go the same way any of us would. In terms of a misbelief, again, it depends on the genre that you're actually writing in. It is a place where genre does make a slight bit of difference. They're always looking to their past to make sense of things. And often, in any kind of ongoing genre, usually they come in with a misbelief. Let's say it's even a romance. They come in with a misbelief. The story disabuses them of it. By the end, it's gone. But beneath that, there almost always is some other new fledgling thing or way they've seen things, and then that plays forward into the next novel. The key thing when you're writing, as you probably know, when you're writing any kind of a series, is anything that you make true about your character, any backstory you give them for the first one is going to be, go on and be true for them, in perpetuity forever, unless you decide to do like that 8th season of Dallas and decide it was all a dream and start over again in book 2. But all of it still absolutely applies because, our past and the way we see things, story specifically, is, the one thing we never do leave home without.
Indeed. So somebody asked a question I think is interesting about body language, that a lot of writing courses and instructors teach the use of body language because body language conveys so much meaning. And they're asking how that relates to what you're talking about in terms of, we had those examples of the surface level being very physical. And I know you and I both see people misuse body language a lot because they think that, it's that example we showed you where my character had tears pooling in their eyes.
Yeah.
And you as the writer know what that means. That's a kind of body language, but the reader has no clue.
Yeah, the truth is you convey very little with body language. I mean, it's a very surface way of conveying stuff, and it's never how you really in depth would convey anything. And I think part of it is there's a massive difference between body language in real life and body language in fiction. And if I could give a very quick example, if any of you watched The Crown, I think was it Netflix, Jenny, that did The Crown?
Yeah,
and they have
the Globe last night.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's slow but brilliant. But let me put it in the last episode of all of it, and she, Elizabeth, there's a picture's being taken of her, and her face changes. The body language on her face changes throughout and it makes the most profound. It gives you this feeling. It is so deeply profound. Now imagine that you're a writer and you're trying to convey that same profound thing by describing the way her face looks. You 100% could not do it. It would be boring. Body language in real life is massively different from body language in a story. All body language in a story can convey is a very general, they're happy, they're sad, they're nervous, they're that. That is not what we care about. We usually get that from the situation. What we're looking for is what that actually means to them and why they're sad and what that is. In other words, with Jenny's thing with Henry, she's sad that her beloved is about to die, but part of the reason it's tearing her up is because she feels responsible for it, and goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into that. It goes into, as if you come into the class, you'll see, as I'm very fond of saying, the story is in the specifics. Body language is a blunt tool. It conveys very little. Yes, you can use it in certain places. Does it convey a lot? No, hardly ever.
Great. So, okay, there's an interesting question about from Stephen, who's writing a romance, and he's asking about having 2 point of view characters, meaning 2 characters who we get to hear their voice, and should each of them have their own series of misbeliefs and backstory and origin story and aha moments?
Absolutely. But what you might find, here's a question for you, Stephen, and just think about it for 1 sec. You've got 2, male, female, let's say, okay? Ask yourself, are they really dual protagonists? Or is one of them what I like to call the alpha protagonist? And in rom-coms, you'll see this all the time. It seems like it's about both of them, but really it's one person's main story. Either way, let's say there is an alpha protagonist, and that's the person whose story you would develop first. The second is always there to service that story in one way or another. If they are genuine alpha protagonists, then yeah, you would figure out something we didn't talk about here is kind of the point that your story is making, and then kind of what that story is going to be. A story is one problem that grows, escalates, and complicates from beginning to end. So each of their misbeliefs, each of their backstories, each of what they're going would be a segment of that. They wouldn't each have completely wildly different things that they're after, or wildly different ways of looking at things. It's still all woven around one story that grows, escalates, and complicates. But to answer your question simply, yeah, you absolutely would. And this is something to one degree or another you may be doing for every secondary character that you write, or if you have more than one protagonist. Absolutely. But the basic thing is it tends to spin off of, or doesn't tend to, it spins off of what your, either one protagonist, dual protagonist, alpha protagonist story is, and then everything else is created. Although those characters could have their own stories if you gave them their own novels, they're still created to really move that story forward. And the way that a story moves forward is by challenging or encouraging, whatever it is that the protagonist is going after to begin with.
Kathleen,
Great question, though.
Yeah, Kathleen asked a question about when in the course of the novel might the origin scene where the character's misbelief was established, might that come? And she asked, could it come towards the end of the novel? And I think that goes to a larger question about, how do you use backstory in the story itself?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is it can come at almost any time. Often, it does come toward the end because it is something that when the character has their aha moment, meaning the moment where suddenly they see their misbelief for what it is, which is, maladaptive, often it does take them all the way back to that moment. But again, it would come in at the moment where they are really making sense of something. And this is what they go back to go, wait, this is where that came from, or this is what's been moving me forward. So it might come at that moment. Absolutely. I mean, you see it often in for instance, you would have seen the entire series of The Killing, the American version of it, but at the very, very end, in the last, episode of it, you get a scene where the main character, Marielle Enos, I can't remember what her name is in the show, suddenly goes back to this moment where her mother had abandoned her, and that was the moment where everything changed. So yeah, it was exactly at that very end where she's going, wait a minute. I mean, that's what gave her the aha moment. That's who I am. And now she can, hopefully start to form bonds with people, which was something. She's like the worst mom ever, I think, in anything, in terms of misreading her son and how she treated him. Not because she was a bad person. Again, misbeliefs don't make your character dumb or stupid or wrong or mean, or that's why fatal flaw is so pejorative and negative sounding. It's not what they're doing on purpose. It's what life has taught them is true. And they're really trying to be, to honor that truth. It just turns out not to be true.
So another question, which is a good one, Mason asks, and it's a good question for people who are not writing for children as well. But he asks about, a child protagonist has not had that long to have their worldview established and reinforced. So how do you deal with that? The answer is it's one of the reasons it's the most potent things to write. But do you want to talk about how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would depend on, just to kind of frame the question, how, what, if you're writing middle grade, if you're writing a YA, if how old the character is when we're going to meet them on page 1. But often, whether it's reinforced or not, and whether it's been majorly reinforced, often it's something that happens, and it can happen. It's funny with when people are writing adult protagonists, and often they'll try to set the origin scene that, where their worldview kind of gets knocked out of alignment, and they start to embrace this misbelief at the age of 3. And it's like, well, you can't really do that because we don't really form memory, until a little bit later. But often it can happen 4 or 5 or whatever, because whether we've had a long time to really dig into what we believe, we are at that age when we're young, again, trying to bring it all in and make sense of it, because it really is about survival. And, for kids, the thing that we need most is somebody who's going to take care of us, someone who's going to care about us enough to feed us, clothe us, give us, shelter. So that you can be 4, 5, 6. I'm working with one writer right now who the kind of the origin scene and all of that happens when the character, I think, is 5. And the thing to think about when you do that, though, is that kid logic is far more sophisticated, far more raw, and far more honest than adult logic, because we adults have time to get, we've had time to get jaded. We've had to have time to let social norms affect how we see things. We've had time to sanitize, and see things, not in as they actually are. Kids don't have that. They don't have that in place yet. They really are much, what they do is more raw. What they see is more raw. What they see is often more honest because they see it as it is without those layers of euphemism and experience in between. So, when you're writing those scenes, often you might want to go back and look at, for instance, Emma Donahoe's room. Jack is 5. So you want to really be sure that you're narrating in a voice that really is trying to make sense. One of the mistakes that writers make, I know this doesn't go to the question, but is that they'll tend to write about, a misbelief coming in when the character is 4 or 5, and they're writing as if they're writing a Disney version of what a kid would think for a kid to read. And that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for that moment where they discover something's untrue. And what it might be that kids grow up assuming that their parents love them, and something might happen at the age of 4 or 5, and they realize that they don't, or they realize that they have to be a certain way in order for their parents to love them. It's like right now, why right now they'll tell you don't put your kid in a daycare place where they have timeout, because timeout implies you're not worth it unless you're being good. So in other words, that's a place where we're making sense of something. And if we take in that lesson, oh my God, unless I'm being good, no one wants to be around me. Well, that's a misbelief that could, so who knows? Maybe that's what happened to your character. They got put on a timeout, and that's what changed everything. Anyway, I've probably gone on too long with that, and I hope that answered the question.
I think it did. A question that was asked at the beginning by a couple people, including Francis, was, okay, let's say you do all this work on figuring out your character's backstory, their origin scene, the scenes that led up to their misbelief being so strong when the novel starts. Can you use that information if it's not used in the novel itself? Can you use that in a separate material that you might share with your readers on a blog post or in a short story or some other format? And the answer is, I love that way of thinking, because that is a very market-focused way of thinking, that you're thinking about your reader and what they might want and how to pull them into your story and your world. And you absolutely could use this information in that way if that works for you and your audience and your writing life. That being said, you will probably find that a lot of it ends up in the book itself. It tends, as Lisa said, it tends to not be pre-writing. It tends to really end up being, scenes and material that is in the novel itself. Okay, there's a question a couple people asked that's interesting, Lisa, interesting in that, we've done this a lot. We tend to get the same kinds of questions, and we tend to have heard them all a lot. This is a slightly new one, or at least formed in a slightly new way. So people are asking roughly what, within a scene and within a book, what the percentage or proportion of backstory to what I would call story present is, if there's a way to speak about that sort of, I don't know what they're looking for, like a formula or a guideline. And sadly, the answer is there is no formula or guideline. I wish it could be, how they say, like when you're writing a blog, oh, you should have 2 pieces of where you share information from somebody else each week, and 1 inspirational quote, and 1, like there's this formula you could follow. It doesn't work like that for writing a novel. It just depends on the story, on the structure, on your style, on the characters, on so much. And, so it's a tough one to answer. Did you want to add anything to that? Non-answer?
No, I think that that's exactly true. It really is impossible to say. I think that often there's more in the beginning than as you get halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, simply because by the time you get more than halfway through, a lot of the backstory in that moment we've already seen happen in the first half of the novel. But it really does go all the way through. And the other thing that we, because this wasn't about that, but that we have talked about, we mentioned just a tiny bit because we're just talking about backstory and weaving it in. The other thing that comes from developing all of this is that again, what's going on in your protagonist's life. Just like if tomorrow was the first day of, if your life was a novel and tomorrow begins page 1 for the next, and you're sitting here on the other side of page 1 right now, when you think about your life for the next year, you know what might happen, you know what you're hoping is going to happen, you know what you're afraid might happen. In other words, there's a ton of balls in play, and all of that stuff came from your, for lack of a better term in life, your backstory, your past. So that in developing all of this, it's not just that the memories that go through and the sense, which is, of course, the biggest, the most fundamental layer of the story that you're writing, because you're writing about how someone changes, and that, change comes from what they were in the past and how the past fights the present. So it's the most potent layer, but it's also in the plot layer. And it will be playing out, based on what you've discovered here. I've worked with writers who thought, I don't know what my plot's got, this basic idea, and we developed this, and by the time we get to even close to page 1, the plot has started to, what's that technical word, that self-populate, like when they talk about in graphs and charts, it's already starting to populate, because you know the characters, so you know what's already in play, you know what's happening, even who the characters are, because you've developed them there. So in other words, what you will get from this, both in terms of the backstory itself and in terms of the balls that it sets in play, I think is really pretty much there on just about every page.
So I think we better stop because we're coming up on 2 hours.
And another thing.
So the last question, and Lisa, I'm going to give you a time limit on this.
Okay.
Okay, you get 3 minutes to give some examples of books that you love that do this really well. This sense of backstory on the page right from the start, and the character's misbelief. Because people are asking for book samples, and I know you could speak for days on this. So maybe just a couple of your favorites.
The one that I'm really liking now, Tell the Wolves I'm Home, I think is a great book. There's a book I'm going to mangle the title of, and it is a straightforward book. Tell the Wolves I'm Home is definitely literary, and it's wonderful. And if you're looking for an aha moment in it, it's like, I think on page 340. But what's it called? Rage Against the Dying. It's a mystery, and I can't remember the name of the writer, but it's a really good example. I also really think, and again, Celeste Ning's Everything I Never Told You is a great example of seeing lots of origin scenes. In other words, the moment where the character's misbelief comes into play. It's a novel that really, it doesn't have, it's told in the third person, and it has, I think, 5 POV characters. And each one of them, or at least 4 of them, you do get, both great examples of where their origin scene, where this misbelief that guided their life from that moment on, and that has cost them a lot. You also get a lot of seeing what a character's thinking they're conveying, and then what they're actually conveying. It's just kind of brilliant for all of that. And if you want an example of weaving, I just wanted The Silent Wife is a great novel to show you. It lets you know in the second paragraph what's going to happen, what it's all about, and kind of what that misbelief is, and going forward. Another book, I think, to look in and really see the use of backstory woven in the beginning is Caroline Leavitt's new book, Cruel Beautiful World, which is a wonderful book. And, writers, Jenny, I know you've had this too, writers often say, how long should a chapter be? How many, and should it be 1 scene or 2? Her book is, the first chapter is 34 pages long. And the first sentence of it, if you'll just indulge me for 1 minute, please, because I've got it sitting right here. The first sentence of it is, this is in 1969. The first sentence of the first chapter is, Lucy runs away with her high school teacher, William, on a Friday, the last day of school, a June morning, shiny with heat. Okay, so that's what she's going to do that day. She's going to run away with her teacher. 34 pages until we get to the moment on that very day when she gets into his car, and it's the silent wife. I don't mean to interrupt, but Natalie is a silent wife. It's the silent wife. Okay, I'm coming back to this now. Anyway, so 34 pages go in between, and what we get in that 34 pages is a ton of layered backstory about who Lucy is, about how she fell in love with her teacher, about why she's running away from him, about why. And again, when someone was talking about the stuff about Ruby being sort of over the top in the beginning, again, we get this idea where we're seeing what Lucy thinks and we're watching her make sense of it. And we know she's wrong. We know she's so wrong about everything. She's about to leave her sister, her beloved sister, and the woman who raised her, and she's not going to tell them where she's going or what's happening. And she thinks that'll be okay. And she loves them. So that, in other words, in the way that she makes sense of it, we get a whole picture of her, these people, what's happened. 34 pages of almost complete backstory, all there in service of this one thing that she's going to do from the beginning. So take a look at that. So I don't know if that helped, but that would be my, those would be what I would recommend at the moment.
Okay, so Lisa and Amy, I'm going to turn off my screen sharing.
Oh, no.
I know. And bring us back on the camera. At least I'm going to do that in theory.
Okay.
And I did it!
Yay, and I should come back. There we go. One of these days when you do that, I'm going to have gotten the Groucho glasses in between.
I know.
I'm dying to do that.
Well, somebody was so sweet and they were saying, can your smiling faces come back on while you're answering questions? And I didn't want to do that because I know I'm like looking at the chat and working on my yellow pad. So all they would see is me doing this. And, I know that you, so that's how it goes.
The top of your head is lovely, though.
Oh, thank you. Amy, you did such a great job of chatting about what it's like to coach in Story Genius. Was there anything else you wanted to say to your fans? They're all thanking you for this awesome.
I think my biggest advice is that if you have the opportunity, just to give it a chance. I think, whatever point you are in writing, it's there's something to get from it, whether you're part of the workshop with feedback, or you do it yourself, or you're using the book and kind of chatting with your writer friends about it. I think there's a lot of different ways to use this. If if the workshop isn't for you, get the book and do it with some friends and ask some questions in your writer groups. It's people do that with me and other coaches I know that are in writer groups all the time, and we're always happy to answer a question that somebody asks, and don't I think just being open to the fact that this is a different way of doing things is what's really helpful. I've written 3 novels and I'm using this to write the 4th. It changes everything, and it can make it a little bit harder, and in a way makes it really much more gratifying. And I know the book is going to be better than the first 3 because of it.
That's awesome. So,
and I hope everybody agrees.
I'm thanking all the people back who are thanking us. We appreciate that you like this. We love doing these kinds of things. And I would urge you also to make sure that you follow Amy's blog. She gives so much great information on writing and writers and has a fabulous community. If you're not already following her, definitely do that. And Amy, can you put your blog URL in the chat so people have that? And I love I love all the Story Genius alumni. I think it's hilarious. Holly, you're so sweet, and some of the other people in here. It's just a testament, right, to how much you can learn from Lisa's method and from digging down deep into the stories. People keep coming back because you learn a lot. It's a whole new way of looking at a story, and it tends to really crack people. My favorite phrase, crack people's brains open. It
figuratively.
You're welcome, Stella and Kim and Andrew and Sharon. The other thing I would urge is for you to follow. I'm putting Lisa's URL up there to follow her. She, I believe, is going to be doing some more video Q&As and answering readers' questions on her blog this year. So definitely.
That's my goal.
Sign up for her list so you can get that. And then If you sign up for my blog, that's kind of the place to get the most up-to-date information on Author Accelerator programs and courses and webinars, just because I put it out twice a week, and Tuesdays always have all the Author Accelerator information, and we do a lot of webinars. We do a lot of free giveaways. We try to really help everybody as a way of showing them the kind of work that we do at Author Accelerator. So check that out. And thank you, Beverly and Sharon and Melissa. We could stay on here for all day, but I think that's
Sounds like
probably
romper
not
room.
a good idea. Right? I know, but it's like we'd have two people watching while we have lunch.
Right.
But this was great. Everybody asked really good questions, and they were really engaged in the chat, which I love. I mean, I know because I tend to do this myself. I tend to watch webinars, and I'm just lurking in the background and doing other things while I listen. That's also a great way to learn. But we love the people who are super engaged and asking questions and challenging us on things. I loved that when I think it was Olivia said, but wait, isn't this too obvious? And you know, it's great to be challenged as well. So
Always.
Lisa, do you want to say anything in conclusion?
No, just that it was really wonderful. This is my favorite thing. Yeah. It was
Well,
fun. We could do it all day.
Thanks to Amy and the Women's Fiction Writers blog and community for hosting us and having us. And we will send out the tape to everyone who listened. And if you have any questions, the place to get them answered is Jade, just like the jewel, Jade, ADE at authoraccelerator.com. And we hope everybody
Jade is a jewel. I just have to say it. Jade is a jewel.
Isn't Jade a jewel? Am I saying that wrong?
Is.
Jade? No, I mean like the actual.
I think it's a stone.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I said that, I'm like, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not a jewel.
But I meant metaphorically. Metaphorically, the actual flesh and blood jade is in fact a jewel, whether she's a stone or not.
Okay, on that, I think we're going to say goodbye. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye, you guys. Thank
Bye.
you.